Everybody in.
Hello?
This meeting
Hey, John.
is being recorded.
Hey, Rob.
Hello?
Good morning. Oh, good afternoon. And the only one we have missing is Lisa. Have you heard from Lisa?
We didn't get a response from her at all, so.
We didn't. Okay. Don't want to take up too much time this morning or this afternoon, so let's stand for Pledge of Allegiance and we'll get started. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone, for getting together today. This is a JCIDA special meeting, and the meeting is to consider bids for work to be done on 146 Arsenal Street. His date for the record, you want to just give us a quick overview? I think everyone's aware of it, but.
Yep. Yeah, so as you know, we need to do some remediation, environmental remediation in the building that we found out since then. For the record, we knew, the Y knew that there would be some asbestos remediation, just like a lot of these old buildings have when they go into that, so that's part of the project. But we also discovered that there were some PCBs in the mastic underneath the floor tile, and so that needs to be removed before the rest of the project can begin. So we're looking first to determine the best method for doing that is to conduct some tests. And the reason we're calling the special meeting is so we keep the project rolling and keep the project on schedule. So we have a proposal from Paradigm for professional service to oversee this. Brad Arthur here is on the line with us if you have any questions on the process, but we've outlined a couple test methods. One involves 4 levels of where you remove a thin, anywhere from a no removal to a 1/2 inch removal of the concrete. And then we apply a PCB extraction fluid to then extract the PCBs out of the cement. Then you vacuum it up, basically rinse it and repeat. And then, so to see how that works, we're optimistic, hoping that's going to work because the cement itself is fairly porous. The other method we're going to test is to take a 2x2 foot block and just do the complete removal of that cement slab, just so we know it's involved there in case we have to choose that option and go that route. So we have from us, first of all, I guess we have a professional services proposal from Paradigm to oversee the test procedures. And then after that, we'll look at the contractor bid we received to do that test. So we have a proposal from Paradigm for $5,410 to do the testing and oversight of the test procedure. Anybody have any questions on that proposal or Brad?
Brad, you have in here set up for 8 samples. Do you think that's I feel you're probably gonna need more for certifying that?
The concept was to take a 1/2 inch core sample before and after the remediation in each test area, because it gives us an indication. We can always take more samples, but I think the 8 samples should give us enough of an understanding of the effectiveness of the combination of the scarification and the extraction.
You're gonna use your current information you have now for your pre-sample?
No, so we will not be sampling the mastic. We will use the current information.
Okay.
We know what the mastic PCB concentration is in that area. It's the core samples that we will take before and after. And again, those will be probably an inch in diameter and and half an inch deep in each area.
Okay. I guess I would like to, leave this open enough so that if we need more samples, we're not.
Right.
Something happens and we feel you need to take more samples, I want you to have the money there to do it.
Okay.
So we'll accept this proposal, well, you will accept the proposal, but we'll have the freedom if we need to do additional sampling, we'll just do that on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. So,
That'll only be a couple $100, I mean, depending on how many samples we have to do, so it won't be anything substantial.
well, let's
So,
do it.
so did this contamination come through the mastic then? Is that
Yes.
what you're saying?
Yep,
Yes.
So the entire building floor has issues then?
Not the entire floor. There are some sections that didn't, the test came back negative.
But had mastic on it?
They were in a different part of the building. There was mastic holding the tile, but in that particular area, there were no PCBs in the mastic.
it may have been who laid when this thing was built back in the 70s, it may have been whoever laid it at that particular point in time or that area, hard to say.
There's also another area where there was a restaurant that did not have any mastic or floor tile in it. It had a ceramic tile that was adhered with grout rather than a floor mastic that would be used for a VAT tile.
We were told that contractors may have mixed oils in certain areas to thin out the mastic, and it would have been that oil that they mixed with mastic that had PCBs. So it could have been just on who was applying the mastic and how they handled it, if I understood the previous discussions correctly.
Correct, Paul.
I just have one question. So we're only doing core samples to 1/2 inch. We don't expect that anything is done below 1/2 inch.
That's correct. Our preliminary testing shows some PCB contamination. Now, these were composite tests, so the test at 1/2 inch would have included material from 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. We subsequently took samples down at 1 inch and found that there was no contamination at 1 inch. So we're confident that at 1/2 inch, with the combination of the extraction fluid that we'll be using, that we'll be able to clean past that 1/2 inch and obtain levels that are acceptable to the EPA. In addition to that, the EPA's clearance criteria for this type of project is a 1/2 inch core sample below the impacted surface or the top of the surface. So we're mimicking what the EPA is requesting. And this information, again, will be used for our path forward for the project. So we want to be consistent with what the EPA is requesting.
So does that mean that you'll be taking it down to 1/2 inch as a minimum anyway throughout the building? If it's less than that, just penetrated less than that, but the EPA is requiring you to go at least 1/2 inch.
We're looking at 1/2 inch as the maximum, hopefully.
Because the solution, so you scarify some concrete down, and then you apply this cap solution, which is the extraction solution, and that can actually go down below the 1/2 inch. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it can go down as much as 1 inch, right, Brad?
Yes, because the concrete is a porous material, the fluid is designed to penetrate down into the concrete, break the bonds of the PCBs, and then allow for extraction of the PCBs, basically through a vacuuming method.
Oh, this is, you won't need to mill it down there to get it out.
Potentially. So we're doing different iterations to understand what the best option is. Because these PCBs have been sitting there for 50 years in the concrete, we may require a combination of scarification and extraction down to 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch would be the worst case scenario. We also don't know how the concrete slab is going to react to scarification. Because it is a very soft concrete with no reinforcements, we're uncertain how the concrete's going to respond. So it'd be fine and also crumble. So that's why we're doing different iterations to understand what we can do from a capability perspective with concrete, and also what will be effective in extracting the PCBs. So the last thing we're doing is actually taking out a 2x2 section of concrete, which would be the absolute worst case, is removal of all of the concrete to be able to extract the PCBs from the site.
Well,
So John, in answer to John,
we talked earlier about the complete removal, but if that looks like it is easier than expected to cut and remove the entire slab, that really wasn't our worst case scenario, because then there's no testing, there's no disposal requirements, correct?
Oh, the cost is prohibitive.
but
So it's a change in the
Paul,
concept of removing the entire deck.
yeah, that's the reason for the testing, Paul, because that slab removal tells what's involved from a physical standpoint as well, how complicated that may be or expensive. So the testing is going to accomplish a couple things. It's going to let us compare the methods to see how feasible they are. And at the same point, to John's question, half-inch would hopefully be the worst-case scenario, but hopefully we can get by with the simple, power washing and abrading the top 1/8 of an inch and applying the fluid. And, the less material we have to remove, the cheaper the process. So this testing, by testing, no removal, 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, and 1/2 inch, plus doing the full block removal, will give us what we need, hopefully, to determine what the best method is moving ahead, the most cost-effective and efficient method.
One of my concerns with the scarification and removal is that there could be upwards of, correct me if I'm wrong, 1,000 tests in that building.
That's correct.
And we could be going back into certain areas that if we could have 80% of the building clean, and we could have to go back again and again in other areas if it's not working. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right. But again, Paul, that's what the test will tell us, hopefully, is how effectively that works.
I understand that. You guys had me sold that if it was doable, removing the entire slab might be the smartest way to go, even if it's a little more money, because we have to get to a certain threshold for the Y to be able to use it for their intended use, correct?
Yep, right. We were leaning that way too, but but we realized too that, the other method may be fine, so let's see what the information, let's see what the test tells us.
I understand that. We have some individuals that weren't in on all the meetings that I've sat in on, and it's understanding some of the pros and cons of each way. So I'm okay with moving forward. My last question is, are we required to pay prevailing wage rates for this test?
Yes.
Okay.
Another question I would have is if it's been identified on this top level of the building as having it, are we obligated, or is someone obligated to test the lower level as well?
Step down.
So my question to the EPA, I posed that question to the EPA, excuse me, and there is no evidence of bulk material still remaining on the lower level. They don't require it just because we found it on the upper level. So if there's any type of extraction of of concrete in the future by the owner of the lower level, then they would be required to do it. There's no obligation on our part to test in that area.
I didn't know if it would be our responsibility or theirs, because the building was built in the same era. I mean, it'd be the same type of material being used, I would assume.
We remain the owner. This is just a ground lease, so any testing is by time.
On the downstairs?
Yeah, and we're the owner of the building for 30 years. But just what Brad said is kind of if Y is gonna start doing modifications in the future, sounds like it's our time again.
But we'll have no responsibility for the first floor. We don't own the first floor.
Right.
So no matter what happens on the.
We own a portion, but we're split ownership.
So one question I want to get clear on is, the initial testing that discovered the PCBs, there's a lot of the floor area right now that is not showing any indication of PCB, right?
Most of it is. There is some area that's not showing any indication, right? Most of it is.
So as we go through the final phase, depending on which process we're gonna
Right,
use,
yeah.
are we gonna leave those areas that are showing no problem alone? Or are we gonna blanket and do the whole floor project as one?
If we do Brad, I think if we do the extraction method proves effective, we don't need to worry about treating the area where there's no, not that it's that significant, but we don't have to worry about treating the area where there's no contamination, right?
That's correct.
Well, is that 20% of the square footage, 10%, 5?
15.
It's approximately 10,000 square feet of the building. So out of the 65,000 square feet, it's about 10,000 that is non-contaminated.
So still, I mean, that's a cost saving. to
Yes,
leave it
yeah,
alone.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
not going in there
yeah,
and disturbing it.
Yeah.
Dave Zembiak, is any of this floor that could potentially be removed, was planned to be removed by Y for their final floor?
The floor tile, yes, and the mastic, yes.
But they weren't gonna remove any of the floor?
No, there's no need to remove, no.
The concrete was gonna stay there.
Brad, as you do the core samples, those, in the process of doing core samples, you'll have a good determination of how that concrete's going to, the physical characteristics of that concrete going down the road, right?
Correct. At least, albeit we're only testing the limited area, we're assuming that that area will be indicative of the entire floor. But yes, we should know how the concrete will respond and what the makeup of the concrete is as we're doing our sampling. And also the scarification. Scarification will be a more disruptive process, so it'll be an indication of how the floor will respond during that process.
So in order to remove a half inch, we're gonna do a test of compression strength of the floor in that area. So,
Well, that sample will end up being powder, right? It's just gonna be a powder sample. It's not gonna be a true core.
Following up on Rob's question, is any of the 6-lane pool going to be in the existing envelope?
No, that's all gonna be outside.
Okay.
I wasn't in the meeting, and if none of this floor can be removed, why can't it be capped? Like a landfill membrane and reinforced concrete? It's because the PCBs are known and then they can't use it for their use. Is that the outcome?
Dave, I'll answer that.
Yes, yep.
There are two different routes that can be taken on the project. One is called a self-implementing remediation plan, and the other is a risk-based remediation plan. What you're referring to is a risk-based remediation plan, where there is a known risk that will remain in place, and it will be managed in place. However, the EPA made it clear that the process to get that approval, first of all, can take up to 24 months to complete. And the second is that it will require deed restrictions to be placed on the property, and also a long-term financial obligation by you as the owner, so that if that building is ever demolished, you're responsible for the cleanup of at least the PCB's contaminated concrete. So that has to be bonded or some type of financial mechanism set up. And that's for the lifetime of the building, whenever that may occur. So based on that, the self-implementing plan, which requires the removal of the PCBs down below 1 ppm, is the best short-term solution. And it may actually cost the same amount of money. The cap to do that would be 6 inches of concrete and an epoxy floor on top of it. They may, with a risk base, allow for a thinner layer of concrete with some other engineering controls in place, but it's still a cost prohibitive and time prohibitive route to go.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Brad?
Yeah, I
Mr.
focus
Chairman,
on.
I move that we approve the Paradigm quote.
Second.
Can we have that with a, up to 10% more if additional samples need to be done?
I would amend my motion. I'll amend my motion to include that language.
All right. On Paul's motion, any other questions or discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
After the fact question, even if worst case scenario, the concrete layer removal, would still going to be under the umbrella of contaminated materials. So how does that not make it cost prohibitive?
Brad, you want to explain the complete removal and how that gets analyzed by weight and can be disposed of if we do have to do the complete removal option?
Yes, when categorizing hazardous waste, we would do a number of tests on the materials, but it's all weight-based. So you look at the percentage of the hazardous material in the actual material that's being removed. So the mastic itself, if that's removed, that's going to have a high level of PCBs. If it's coupled with the concrete and it's just the residual, there's a good chance that the overall weight will be less than the 50 parts per million that is required for hazardous to be categorized as hazardous waste. It's not a guarantee, but it's highly probable based on the density of the concrete versus the density of the remaining PCB contamination.
Because then you have the whole bulk of all the,
Yeah.
even the non-contaminated.
So you're not having to pay that long
Right.
price.
Yeah, we just do landfill.
And the other thing is there's no EPA program or approval of our plan if we remove the entire deck, correct?
That's correct. We would still notify the EPA out of courtesy because they've been involved in the discussions to date. But there's no self-implementing remediation plan that would have to be submitted because we're removing the hazard in total.
So you will have people on site during these tests?
Yes.
My only real concern is we cut out a 2x2 section of the deck. The first piece will always come out the hardest. You know, I don't know whether they're gonna saw cut it and try to lift it or what, but it'll be interesting to see their mechanism for testing that process to see if it's doable.
Concrete removal is another thing. It's the steel.
Do you have a recommendation for which one of the remediation companies to use?
I would suggest we go with the SES proposal. We sent the third proposal this morning, using prevailing wage rates. Their proposal is $12,150. Jersey was already at 16.5, and that was without prevailing wage rates. So even without prevailing wage rates, they were more. And then the AAC contracting, the one we received from them this morning, which includes prevailing wage rates, was just a hair over 20,000. So the SES proposal really seems to make the most sense.
What do you have for SES?
With prevailing wage rate was $12,150.
Yeah, they got 13.15, 13.150.
Oh, typo, 13,150. Sorry.
No problem.
Now, Brad, do you have any recommendation? Are they all reputable remediation contractors?
Yes, they are. They are all chosen because of their experience with both PCB projects, but also with the combination of scarification and extraction. All three have performed it in the past. And also they're capable of staffing the project.
Okay.
As we all know, that labor issues that companies are having right now, all three are committed, at least verbally, to being able to staff the project long term, meaning the main project, assuming it starts in August. So a combination of those factors, I would go with the my opinion would be to go with the lowest proposal.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we move forward with, what was that, Sessler? That is a low.
Yes.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. And that is for $13,150. Any other discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I guess I have one other question for you, Brad, is you've been working on this, putting this together and everything. We don't have a service contract with him for that portion of it?
He's working on a master services agreement for us to use moving forward. This proposal is just for getting this past the test.
What about the production of what he's done so far?
And he's gotta get that billing to us. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So,
That's not part of the proposal. The
There are
2,500.
proposals that were issued to the YMCA prior to our discussions together, so I'm honoring those. Those reports have already been completed. Anything that they're financially responsible for will stay with them. So Dave and I still have to sit down and make sure we're on the same page with regards to who's financially responsible for what, so.
Okay.
and Mr. Chairman, just the path going forward, so the contractor, we can get to work this week, to get the testing done. Brad, I think you're figuring we could probably have the results by the end of next week.
That's correct.
And then, based on the results of the test, we can work on a scope that goes to EPA for the full remediation, and they need 30 days to approve that. And, Brad, I guess the question is, can we do it, I mean, so we can be ready to move, so say at the end of July, we get the EPA approval, we can probably issue an RFP for proposals for our method, so we have those ready to go once we have the EPA approval, right? Or we wait till we get the EPA approval to do those RFPs.
I think it's something that you can do beforehand, with the understanding that it may change.
Yes.
Getting the EPA involved prior to where we are now was intentional, so that they have the exposure to the project, they understand the direction we're going. They also had input into what we're doing from a pilot test perspective. So their buy-in will be more than likely once we have all this information together, because we know what they want to see.
Yeah, and thank you for reaching out and involving them up front. That will help us moving forward.
Justin, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think you've attended to everything necessary to get the monitoring agreement or the studying agreement in place, if you will, and the main contract undertake the investigation. As I mentioned, we're going to learn more as the investigation unfolds and be prepared to issue RFPs and solicit bids on the remediation as quickly as we can, and work with EPA to make sure that scope is nailed down and certain as quickly as we can.
Okay.
And I would say I made a comment earlier about getting a contractor on board to get that equipment and cubicles out of there right now, but we probably can wait till the July board meeting, because I wasn't thinking about the review, so that gives us time. If we had to the board meeting, we wouldn't have the EPA approval before the end of July.
Right.
And the contractor only need a couple weeks. We would easily get that stuff out of there before we had to mobilize for remediation.
Brad or Dave, quick question. Would the three firms that have submitted proposals to do the test site, to see them bidding on the project
Yes.
remediation,
Yes.
all three of them?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
It would be a separate proposal bid, we're bidding a specific
They're all
project here.
qualified to
Yeah,
do.
that would be a specific, we'd be bidding what's required for the full remediation.
That should go fairly readily.
In the backdrop, as we're going through this process, we're studying and then confirming scope. I'd recommend taking a look at all of the sources and uses that the IDA is going to be required to undertake the primary remediation. And that'll be a mixture of the capital reserve account that the IDA retained, and other sources. Based on the estimates that we've received thus far, might need to look at whether the DoD grant could be used in the first instance and then recharged by the IDA, and whether you have all the cash resources on hand necessary to undertake the remediation as quick as possible. So I think a little internal homework with Lyle and the staff team to put together the capital stack, if you will, for this aspect as we roll into the later part of the summer and get going on this stuff.
Quick question, Justin, if the Y was to do the remediation, are they required to pay prevailing wage rates?
It's a good question, likely not. My understanding, though, was that they're not willing to proceed with the ground lease and the lease to the facility until this is attended to, and we're kind of in the middle of a lease amendment process as well, so.
I guess what I'm thinking, if we pay for it, but we pay them to do the remediation. And when I look at the amount that these quotes went up because of the prevailing wage rates, is there a way to contract with the Y to do it so they don't have to, a mechanism to save us the prevailing wage rates, I guess?
They're good strategies. I might want to ask you to go into executive or work with a committee to go through some of the backdrop on it. One of the issues here is that it's an IDA-owned asset, and the YMCA is a civic facility. One of the strategies that used to work and works now with IDA projects that you can facilitate is that if you have a straight lease transaction or a typical IDA transaction where the beneficiary is undertaking construction, prevailing wage does not apply. In this instance, you are the owner of the building. It is an IDA asset, and you contemplate using the IDA to directly do traction of the work. That's where prevailing wage kicks in. If the YMCA were to directly contract for the work, there may be a way to avoid the prevailing wage implication and requirement. But it begs the question of how does the IDA reimburse them? How does that financial mechanism take place where you're not necessarily empowered to facilitate civic facilities at this point?
Okay.
I go a little bit.
Are we falling under tax exemption on this project?
Yeah, we would,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, because that's a pretty substantial number on the job.
Yeah, the IDA is a public benefit corporation, can utilize its own sales tax exemption as a governmental entity, so you'll have that offset, which is helpful. But I don't know if it'll cover the differential between non-prevailing wage and prevailing wage.
Either way, the state makes money.
Nobody does.
Okay. Anything else, Dave?
No.
For today?
No.
Board members, anything more? We'll take a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
All in favor, aye? Opposed?
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, that's right.
Everyone.
The recording has stopped.
Yeah, we'll see how it works.
Well, hopefully the solution is always going to be our central